Ladies and gentlemen, today is August the 18th, 2024, and we are here to talk about the world. Current events, foreign policy, economics, world history, you name it, we'll talk about it in another episode of World Discussion with Agent Smith. Smith.
Hello?
Yo.
Hey. How are you?
Pretty good. Kind of tired, but I'm good. We did a bunch of rollerblading today. In the heat of the midday sun. But we survived.
How hot is it out there?
Not too bad, actually. I think it was like 80 something. Let me check. Yeah, the high was 83, so it probably got up to like 80.
The high got up to 80.
Yes. But people here, they do complain about the heat. And I remember Texas, and I know how Texas is. Texas,
It's 103 right now.
Yes. And no doubt more hot and sticky.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
His audio is pretty quiet.
Fun.
Me too. I turned up his audio a little bit, chat. Let me know if that's better. Still fine-tuning some stuff after upgrading all the PC and audio stuff.
Right.
It's been running great. It handles Act 3 Baldur's Gate, super smooth, max graphics. Very happy.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. You can even be in city and just walk around like it doesn't even matter. Played that on my old computer and it's like, oh, I'm dying.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a heavy lift.
Yep. We already have some questions for you leading into this one, so thanks, chat, for being interactive. Just to quickly brag, I did complete honor mode, and it was really epic last fight. Yep.
Yeah, you mentioned that.
Yeah, I won't spoil what the fight is for people who don't want a spoiler, but you need diverse types of damage, and you need a lot of damage, and you need to resolve the fight in a certain number of turns. So there's a pressure to deal a diverse amount of damage to the boss, otherwise you die. So my brother actually drafted up a plan for us. Let me see if I can find the image. It was very funny. Like MS Paint, dragon diagrams. Alright, we got this. Braun leading the way. He was like, okay, we're going to go up and around the left. Copy pasting this to you in Discord. But we did one trick to prep, and you could say that this is sweaty if you want to, but we spec'd all of ourselves except for our cleric Braun. Everyone became a cleric temporarily and cast Divine Intervention, which you can do once per campaign, per character, and we prayed for potions. Because we were low on consumes leading into the last fight. So we got elixirs and different kinds of healing potions. We got a cloud giant strength potion, which we really needed. Got a couple potions of speed, and that ended up being really crucial for us during the last fight. So that's a little trick that you can do if you really want to squeeze out some more value. I was temporarily a cleric of the goddess Elistrae, the Seldarine drow goddess of beauty and life and dance, which... hell yeah, that's exactly what I'm about. Let's go.
It's a very creative solution.
Yeah. Our consume situation in our run is relatively better than what the four of us ended up with. I think the four of us had a really badass team in terms of damage, but a lot of our fights were messy, and we weren't very efficient about collecting consumes for ourselves, or being efficient about it. We kind of blew through stuff randomly. Lethargic got us a whole bunch of times, so haste is definitely a double edge. You can absolutely lose fights because of having haste broken on two of your main characters for a turn early on. Yowza. But yeah, last fight is very good. I'm excited to run it with you when we get there.
If we get there.
We'll get there.
No guarantees.
We could get unlucky, but I think we have a really good set. Yep, very good game. Excited to play that later.
It'll be fun. Well, I'm glad you were able to finally get to the ending there. Did you see the epilogue? Or did you guys skip that?
Yes, I saw the epilogue.
Oh,
Dude,
cool.
the Withers diss tape of the evil gods was so funny. I was not expecting that.
Oh, you like that, huh?
Yeah, that was great.
Oh.
But yeah, we got a bunch of questions off the bat. One of them, general life question, Agent Smith, what are you grateful for?
Just in general, everything that's good in my life, I'm thankful for. You know, roof over the head, water, food, etc.
Is the roof
I
over the
don't
rest of your
own.
body too, or just your head?
Sorry, what?
Is the roof over just your head or the rest of your body too? No, I'm just
Oh,
teasing.
it's everything. Yeah, it's quite a nice roof.
Good.
No, I don't own my own place, so whenever you're in that situation, you're always grateful to have a place to stay.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, just the basics, I guess, but also, you know, good health, what have you.
Mm-hmm.
I've been pretty lucky in that regard over time, so quite happy about that. Here's hoping it continues.
Hell, hell yeah.
I'm picking through my notes here. I didn't quite get around to organizing them. Well, I did beat They Are Billions, so that's my gaming news.
Nice. Congrats, well done.
When I say beat, I mean I beat the campaign mode.
Uh-huh.
It's kind of a slog near the end because the missions just kind of get progressively longer.
Mm-hmm.
Can be a little tiresome. But it was worth it in the end. Very cool, jazzy song during the credits. So, worth it, I'd say.
Nice.
Very fun.
I have not beaten that one, just did the survival mode.
I
Decent
tried
bit.
that for the first time after I beat it. It's interesting. It's a bit different.
Mm-hmm.
I was surprised by how different it was. Like, I'd only played the campaign, so I just assumed the railroad mechanic was just like a core part of the game, and they don't have that in survival mode at all.
Mm-hmm.
Are you familiar with that? Have you tried the campaign at all?
I have not.
Okay, so in the campaign missions, you know how in survival mode you've got like your HQ, right? Your main building.
Mm-hmm.
So in the campaign missions, there's actually a railroad that runs next to it. And every 24 hours, a train will come. And depending on the text that you've researched, it'll bring you resources.
Mm-hmm.
Also, it's only when the train arrives that any new houses that you've built will actually increase your population and worker count.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas in survival mode, as soon as you finish the building, it automatically increases. So that changes the timing of things a bit.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you kind of have to be careful with the houses and time construction, especially early in a campaign mission to coincide with, you know, the train arrivals.
Mm-hmm.
And the train can be a part of your economic strategy. Again, more so early game in the campaign mode. If you've got it set to deliver additional stuff besides just gold, you know, it can also deliver with the right text, stone, iron, wood, what have you. And that can help expedite construction early on in the mission significantly. You know, I learned that the hard way in survival mode. I was so used to having more stuff, more resources early on because of the train. I was actually caught off guard by how little I had early in survival mode. It really slows things down a lot. Fun game. Pretty well designed overall, especially given what a shoestring budget it had.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was a Kickstarter, wasn't it?
I think I remember it being a smaller scale project. I don't remember if it was specifically a Kickstarter though.
Yeah, its initial funding was through Kickstarter. So that's a rare game that was largely funded by gamers rather than like venture capital or something, or maybe just business loans. So full credit to them for making that work. That's
Mm-hmm.
pretty hard to do.
Hell yeah, it is. Game development is very, very hard. It's a super competitive space. You're going up against the entire library of all games that have been made. Go make something that's going to capture people's attention when all of that has already been made. And
Yeah.
there's other high budget stuff that's being rolled out every year.
Well, fortunately for them, younger folks are a little bit averse to some of the older stuff. Kind of got it's kind of like black and white movies. You know, you kind of have to get into it, but otherwise, people don't necessarily are not necessarily naturally attracted to those. You know, for some people, the lack of color puts them off.
Yeah. Breaks their immersion too old-timey.
Which is too bad, because there's definitely a lot of good old games and a lot of good old black and white movies that they're missing out on.
What game? He's talking about They Are Billions. The other questions today were about specific regions and kind of an update for each of them.
Okay.
We got
Sounds like fun.
one message in Discord of someone asking if things are not doing very well in South Sudan. What's going on in South Sudan?
South Sudan. Yeah, most of the media attention has been on Sudan, so South Sudan hasn't really gotten as much. Not a whole lot different. I haven't heard about major fighting over the past couple years, so I think things have kind of calmed down a bit. But you know, the baseline level of violence in South Sudan is still relatively high. You know, so it's still not great. For those of you who maybe are not familiar with the country of South Sudan, it was actually originally a part of Sudan. And pretty much immediately after Sudan's independence from the British back in, I want to say, the mid-1950s, there was immediately tension between the northern and southern parts of the country. The northern part of the country was ethnically Arab, and the southern part was basically a kind of amalgam of different sub-Saharan ethnic groups. And they didn't get along. You know, the Arabs were very much part of the then dominant pan-Arab nationalist movement that was popular all over the Arab world. And, you know, that's great if you're Arab, but if you're not, it's not all that appealing. And there was a substantive fear that if there was a pan-Arab nationalist government in Sudan, then it would not respect the rights of non-Arab minority groups in Sudan. So those non-Arab minorities, which were, again, concentrated in southern Sudan, started to lobby and eventually fight for the independence of southern Sudan. And so the fighting was kind of on again, off again for several decades. But it got particularly fierce, I want to say, in like the 1990s. You know, maybe I'm not super familiar with the timelines. You know, if I'm wrong about that, please correct me. But that led to the eventual partition of Sudan. You know, eventually there were peace talks between the Sudanese government and the rebels in the, I want to say, mid-aughts, like around 2005. And I think it was especially the Obama administration a couple years later that really pushed hard to get the Sudanese government to accept the terms of the agreement that would allow South Sudan to become independent. And eventually they did. And South Sudan became rather I believe the youngest, I should say the newest independent country on the planet. And I think it still is.
Interesting.
East Timor. Sorry, what?
Interesting. I did not know that.
Oh yeah, it had been East Timor, which became independent around 2000, the year 2000. But then South Sudan got its independence around 2010. I don't think there's been anybody else since then. I'm not counting like the little micro states, like, you know, the Donetsk. Well, I guess that's not a micro state. The Donetsk People's Republic, or, you know, the sort of those other little breakaway republics that have mostly been recognized by Moscow, but not by anybody else. Those don't really count quite yet. There's a debate within, well, it's not even really a debate. There's a discussion, you could say, in international relations about when countries become independent. And there's not actually a fixed point. Like, it's not a matter of just a country declaring independence and then becoming independent. It has more to do with whether or not that declaration of independence is recognized internationally by a large number of countries. That's basically the bare minimum. If you can do that, then everybody's just going to consider you an independent country. But if you're only recognized by a couple countries, then the water kind of gets muddier. That's a little more unclear. So at that point, it's basically subjective. Maybe it's independent, maybe it's not, depending on who you talk to.
Mm-hmm.
But in general, there hasn't been any new countries that have received as many recognitions of independence as South Sudan has since 2010. So as of now, South Sudan holds the what would you call it? The record, whatever you want to call it, as the newest country.
Youngest nation, yeah.
There you go. So after independence, things went to shit. Like a lot of revolutionary governments, institutions were not strong. And so there was pretty much immediately infighting between the two main factions within the new government. And it had to do with the usual stuff. One guy wanted more power, the other guy didn't want to give it to him. And so rather than settling it through the ballot or through negotiations, they settled it the way they'd been settling disputes for the previous several decades, which was violently. I think the guy that started the violence was not powerful enough to really seriously challenge the authority of the government, so they weren't able to overthrow it, but they were able to cause significant violence to break out, especially in rural areas, mostly along the border with Sudan, I think. And I haven't read super into it, but I think there were allegations that he was getting support from the Sudanese government. So that may or may not be true. It would make some sense. Governments in general prefer to maintain influence within countries on their border that are very unstable, especially if they're breakaway provinces, effectively. But I don't think it was ever fully verified either. So a lot of the violence was kind of like a lot of the violence in places like Africa, it tends to deteriorate into ethnic style violence. So, herders versus sedentary farmers and the, predominant ethnic groups that dominated within those particular economic groups started to kind of turn on each other. Cattle is a big industry, so ranchers in particular were targeted. The cattle would be stolen, or they would go and steal some rival's cattle in return, and that created a lot of economic dislocation because of the importance of that industry and its vulnerability to the breakdown in law and order. But the last I had checked, that violence had kind of been tapering off over time. There had been attempts by the Obama administration and then later administrations to try to, mediate between the two leaders responsible for the violence, and that had borne some fruit. The violence never fully stopped, but civil war at least kind of tapered off. The violence tapered off to the point where you couldn't say it was like in a civil war anymore. So that had been my understanding. Maybe there's been newer developments, but I hadn't heard anything new since then.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Sudan has definitely been the bigger story for the past couple years, like full-on civil war between elite actors, which has dislocated 10 million people, I want to say. And it's killed a pretty hefty number, too. Let me check that number. 4 million. Okay, I was way off. 4 million dislocated in Sudan, not 10 million.
That's still a lot of people. I think in a previous episode we talked about, even though this isn't the most violent period in human history, people are very dislocated.
Yeah.
Due to conflicts like this and Ukraine and other stuff.
Yeah, the record has been broken basically annually for the past several years.
Mm-hmm.
I just Googled it, so the number is worldwide there are 110 million people who are displaced currently.
Damn. Well, that's a lot.
Yeah, global population is 7 billion. What is it now? It's very high.
Mm-hmm.
8 billion. Wow. So, it doesn't take a whole lot when you have 8 billion people to dislocate large numbers of people. Economic problems, civil war, even just political instability, political unrest. Even if all that stuff happens and only impacts a fraction of the world population, that's still enough to affect, tens of millions of people.
Mm-hmm.
So we don't need World War III to have tens of millions of people dying and tens of millions of people being dislocated. Given how large the global population is now and how fragile the global economy can be, like it can just take disruption now to cause similar numbers.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. South Sudan trying its best. It makes me wonder, because you said it's the youngest nation that is internationally recognized, which are the largest ones that are not recognized that much? Like the Kurds, I think. That's a group that comes to mind. I don't know if they declare themselves as sovereign, but it's a decent population of people. I don't know if you're muted. Stream is good, chat? Stream is good. Alright. He's not lighting up in Discord, so... Oh, his PC froze. Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, you're listening to World Discussion with Agent Smith. Just a touch of a technical difficulty here. He'll be restarting and rejoining us shortly. The classic. The classic blue screen. You know what I love about blue screening? Is that it gives you that really nasty metallic grinding sound when your computer is going down. Just adding insult to injury. Back in 15 minutes or 15 seconds? No, you could totally do a World War II wartime British Atlantic radio accent. Thank you. If you'd like to commission some voice acting work, just let me know. 15 weeks. Restart his computer. Fuck. Excuse my language. This episode of World Discussion with Agent Smith is rated R. Viewer discretion is advised. Okay. It's time. Go. Okay, see a third base. Do not see the adepts there. Most injured drone, you can be a... Oh, they canceled that? Oh, they totally could have taken that. Ooh. Just like... intimidated them off of it. Okay, that's just brutal. Things are dead, but they did a lot of damage. Oh fuck, I forgot Roach Warren. Ay caramba. Ay caramba. Microphone, mic. What microphone do you use? Shure SM7B. Oh fuck! No. Yes. Trying to drone. Let's get one of these. That was a very good adept attack. Okay. How many dudes do you have? I have this many. Oh my god. It's all zealots. Oops, all zealots. Just thought I'd visit over here, if that's cool. Alright, I have +1 ranged already. My economy is not good. Forgot my Roach Warren? I have it. I have a Roach Warren. Okay. We've defeated their ground army, but their air forces are even still a problem.
Drogora redeemed Pet Loki though, so I'm in here to pet Loki.
Oh, welcome. You like the mechanical keyboard sound? Yeah, it sounds nice.
It's so squishy.
I mean, so many air units. Love you. We need a lot more queens. They are spamming oracles. Really cool. Uh-oh. Maybe we're dead. Queen's hold. Try your best. The drones are protecting her. The drones. Excellent work, opponent. GG. Well played. Well played. ASMR stream greater than game sounds. Tilted of Wings of Liberty campaign? Oh. It's a good campaign. It's interesting that StarCraft made a lot of progress from Wings through HOTS through Legacy of the Void. Agent Smith is restarting his computer. Thank you for your patience, chat. Welcome to World Discussion ASMR surprise segment. The world made a lot of progress in the last 14 years. Yep. I did not see the finals, unfortunately. But I was on a lovely date with the lady, fortunately. Taking some us time was splendid. And much needed. Brocode says SC2 greater than the ladies. Is the ladies like a conglomerate organization involving a set group of women? Or do you mean one's partner in general? That is dedication to StarCraft. Wow. I can respect it. You recently played all 3 campaigns. Gameplay is pretty even across all of them. The metagameplay of upgrading units is much improved in HOTS and Legacy of the Void. Yes. Roddy won the free-for-all show match. Nice. Get jacked for the bros. Who are these bros you speak of? Men in general or a specific subset of men? What do you mean? Checking to see if they're taking a third base. I will take a third of my own. Meanwhile. Just get this, just in case. I feel like this is a relatively better map for Ling Roach to play than Ling Bane, but I'm not sure. Where's the drone? Oh, it was the Roach horn. 6. Okay. Okay. Let's see how many lings they are making. I did make 1 overlord. Okay, now we're gonna have a burst of units. Here we go. Making some overlords. Inject creep, and go back to the main. Get a lair. making all drones behind this. This is just a light pressure. Nice. Get another one. Another one. Yeah. Okay. We have more roaches. Do we have range attack? Not yet. We need that. Range attack is on the way. Roach speed is next. Roach speed, we drone. Because we don't have Vespine gas to make roaches. We await Agent Smith doing a brief Zerg ASMR segment. Loose. He's back.
Yeah. Technical difficulties.
It's okay. I'm glad that you're okay. And the PC survived.
On the plus side, I got a ham sandwich in.
Nice. Into your computer, or you ate it?
I ate it.
Okay. Nice.
Yeah, one downside of having an older computer is that startup time is a bit of an issue. So if you have to restart it, you're going to have some time to spare.
True.
Still don't know why it's been doing that.
How many Chrome tabs did you have open?
Just 8.
Just 8. Okay, that's not too bad.
Maybe I should have closed one tab, though. That could take up a lot of energy.
Hmm. Chrome is pretty gnarly for taking resources. Why I ask, sometimes it helps me a lot.
Yeah, I probably should just close it. Well, what did I miss while I was gone?
Not much. Been quietly playing an ASMR Zerg game. People are enjoying it. I have a new custom keyboard thing and it sounds pretty nice. Nice clack. It's very ergonomic and APM efficient, so I don't actually need to spam my buttons as much as your regular StarCraft gamer might.
Yeah.
Which is good. Means better wrist health over the years.
Yeah, that is a concern the longer you go, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, stuff's gonna start breaking down the older you get. Gotta think more about it. Well, I hope the answer to the South Sudan question was satisfactory. I haven't heard anything new, so I don't really have any updates.
All good.
I assume that's a good thing. But maybe that's me being optimistic. I will say that the Obama administration took a particular interest in South Sudan. They kind of saw it as their baby.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they kind of wanted that to be a success story that they could point to and take credit for. So the fact that there was so much violence after independence was kind of a downer for them.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they were hoping it would do better.
Oh, I was asking, what are the unrecognized states that are relatively large? And I mentioned the Kurds, and I think that's right when the computer froze.
That's not an unrecognized state. That's an
It is
example of a
recognized.
stateless people.
Oh.
So they're the largest ethnic group without a state, but they do not, as of yet, have any state that they have tried to form and use as a vehicle to achieve independence.
Mm-hmm.
There's a autonomous Kurdish government in Iraq, and there's a de facto regional Kurdish government in Syria, specifically eastern Syria. And there's definitely not an autonomous regional government in Turkey. The Turkish government doesn't allow that. But none of the regional governments in either Iraq or Syria are seeking independence right now. They haven't declared independence or anything like that. I'm sure the PKK in Turkey would like to, but they don't have any territory that could be considered extensive enough to form the basis of a potential independent country.
Mm-hmm.
So right now, they're more of just a guerrilla army, effectively, that doesn't really control territory, but has some popularity amongst certain quarters of the Kurdish population in Turkey. So there's no unrecognized Kurdish state anywhere, as far as I know.
I see.
If you want an example of a large, unrecognized state that has declared independence, probably your best bet is Somaliland.
Mm-hmm.
That is technically supposed to be a part of Somalia, but they declared independence back in the 90s. And they've been doing pretty well, especially compared to the rest of Somalia, although that's a pretty low bar. They have a reasonably stable government, relatively strong political institutions, relatively stable economy. Like, for the Horn of Africa, they're actually doing pretty well. You kind of have to give them a lot of credit for that. The U.S. government would probably recognize them, save for the fact that the U.S. government has a vested interest in trying to build the state in Somalia,
Mm-hmm.
and the Somali government continues to claim Somaliland as a part of its territory. So there's a lot of interest in trying to not undermine the state you're trying to back, the nascent state that you're trying to back, by allowing one of its breakaway provinces to achieve recognition and basically officially become independent. Lots of people in the rest of Somalia would not like that. So the U.S. is kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place. You know, the Somaliland could be a pretty reliable ally in the Horn of Africa. Certainly they themselves have a vested interest in trying to fight Islamism and jihadis of one kind or another, which is the main interest the U.S. has in the Horn of Africa. But they're not interested in trying to, rebuild Somalia. They kind of want to go their own way. And so that interest puts them at cross purposes with the U.S. interest in Somalia itself. And so the result is that we have not extended recognition to them as of yet, and probably won't for some time, if ever. So that would be my main example of a large, unrecognized state.
Mm.
All of the other ones that I can think of off the top of my head are ones in places that are relevant to Russia. So Russia recognizes the, what would it be? Transnistria Republic in Moldova. I think they still recognize South Ossetia and Abkhazia and Georgia, but I think they also might have annexed South Ossetia at some point. I seem to recall them talking about doing that, but I don't remember if they ever followed through. They definitely annexed the Donetsk People's Republic and the Lugansk People's Republic. So those are not technically independent states anymore. Those are just officially a part of Russia, according to Russia. So they don't really qualify here as unrecognized states.
Yeah, they're trying to annex them, not liberate them and let them be autonomous.
Well, for a while that was ambiguous, right? For a while it looked like they might want to keep them independent, or at least quasi-independent, so they could use them as leverage against Ukraine. But then when the war started, well, actually just a few days before the war started in 2022, they actually just officially announced that they were annexing them and that they were provinces of Russia. So there was ambiguity for a while, but now there's none. Now it is just expansionism.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's about it. I don't think there's really any other unrecognized states that I can think of. Maybe you could count what is it? Azad Kashmir, I think is what it's called.
Where's
So the
that?
part of Kashmir that's occupied by Pakistan
Mm-hmm.
is, or rather was, not technically incorporated into Pakistan. It was technically maintained as an independent state. And they call it Azad Kashmir. Azad is basically Urdu for free, so free Kashmir. So in so much as that is technically an independent state, it's one that pretty much nobody but Pakistan recognizes. So you could consider that an independent state, but everybody is aware that the reality is that Pakistan controls it. The government is Pakistani controlled. The Pakistani army operates there, so effectively it's part of Pakistan, regardless of whatever fiction the Pakistani government have been trying to maintain. Up until a couple years ago, you could have said, what was it? Artsakh, I think is what it was called. The Artsakh Republic was that piece of Azerbaijani territory that the Armenian government had occupied, but not annexed. It was not formally part of Armenia. Rather, the Armenians were propping up a local government there as a quote-unquote independent government. Effectively, the Armenian government controlled it. Everybody kind of knew that, but they wanted to maintain the fiction that it was a separate entity. But then a couple years ago, the Azerbaijani government invaded Artsakh, and they stopped just short of the capital when a ceasefire was agreed. But then I think like 6 months later, they resumed and took the whole thing. So Artsakh is no longer a unrecognized state. It no longer exists at all. It has effectively been eliminated.
Damn.
Yeah, almost the entire ethnic Armenian population of that territory fled in advance of the Azerbaijani army, and they've been dislocated ever since.
Yeah, there are a bunch of Armenian people in the Los Angeles area.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, they got a sizable community over there.
They have a pretty strong sense of family, so they tend to network really well.
Yeah, they're pretty conservative people overall.
Mm.
It's very much an old world country.
Traditional.
Yeah, tough people.
Mm.
Pretty much everybody in the Caucasus has a reputation in the region for being pretty tough, very hard-nosed. If Russians are the European people that Europeans are scared of, then Caucasian people are the people that Russians are scared of.
Mm. We also had questions about updates on Bangladesh and Thailand. The question about Thailand was specifically referencing, is there nepotism going on? I think the person who's in power now is related to a previous billionaire leader or something.
Yeah, it's his daughter. So, yeah, I mean, the answer is yes, but you have to qualify that by saying that if you are, like, a billionaire in a country where the political elite doesn't like you, then you're going to have trust issues, right? your political party needs to be run by people you can trust, and you're probably not going to find anybody you trust more than family. So it's not unusual in countries where there's a lot of political discord for you to see that specifically for that reason. It's especially common in authoritarian countries. It's not just nepotism when an authoritarian leader tries to pass on, his power to his family. That's basically just insurance against his successor turning on him after he's out of power, because that is not uncommon. If you're an authoritarian leader and you want to step down, then you basically can't, because the next guy will also be an authoritarian leader without anything inhibiting his exercise of power. And if they decide that they want you gone in order to act as insurance for you potentially re-seizing power using your extended network, there's not going to be anything to stop them. They can just kill you. Mm-hmm. So authoritarian leaders are well aware of that fact, and that's one of the big reasons they stay in power so long. Like there's no retirement policy that is safe if you're an authoritarian leader. So Thailand is not authoritarian, but its politics are very contentious. And Thaksin Shinawatra, apparently that's how you pronounce his name. He's had lots of run-ins with the government. He's effectively been exiled after the military overthrew his first government back in the day. Later on, he ruled by proxy through his sister when his party returned to power, and then that government was overthrown in a military coup. And it's only now that there was a confluence of interests between the forces of the status quo in Thailand, that being the conservative monarchists in conjunction with the military. That confluence of interest had to do with the nascent liberal reformist party that used to be called, Move Forward? Let me check here. I think I wrote it down somewhere.
I think I remember you mentioning that.
Yeah, we talked about it. Yeah, it was originally Future Forward, the Future Forward Party. And the government thought that they were a little too strong and threatening for their so they banned it. Arbitrary reasons, basically. It's very easy to get a party banned if you want, because the judiciary can basically just engineer shit. So after it was banned, the people who had been members, specifically the party leadership, formed a new party called the Move Forward Party. And then that was the party that ran in the most recent election. They won the most seats, and they had been nominally running in alliance with Thaksin Shinawat's party. So they thought that they were in business. They thought they were going to form a new government, and then Thaksin Shinawat stabbed them in the back and made a coalition with the conservative parties, which shocked everybody, because Thaksin Shinawat has been enemy number one for the conservative parties of Thailand for something like 20 years now. And again, that was just kind of a common enemy, right? Because the Move Forward Party had actually eclipsed Thaksin Shinawat's party in popularity, right? It actually won more seats. So Thaksin Shinawat cut a deal with the conservatives to try to keep Move Forward out of power. So obviously the conservatives just wanted to keep the major reformist threat out of power. Their interest was obvious. In Thaksin Shinawat's case, his interest is a little more unclear. It was noted at the time that the government reversed, I shouldn't say reverse, but basically Thaksin Shinawat was allowed to return to Thailand from exile, which he had been too afraid to do before, because it was assumed that he would be arrested immediately for, a whole variety of charges that previous governments had brought against him. So it seems there was a deal cut there on behalf of Thaksin Shinawat to allow him to return. And in exchange, he agreed to support the conservatives to keep the Move Forward Party out of power. Yeah, since then, the Move Forward Party was targeted with some new charges, specifically that there was some lèse majesty going on. There were insults against the king. And the argumentation was that one of the core campaign promises that the party had made while it was running for office was that they wanted to reform the monarchy, because they said that it was too powerful. and they wanted to introduce more, democracy into Thailand's political institutions. And the judge, overseeing the case that was brought, basically said that was an insult to the monarchy, and that it warranted the dissolution of the party.
Quick question: isn't that a compliment? Damn monarchy,
What?
you so powerful. Hey, stop talking shit about us. I wasn't talking shit. I was saying you're powerful.
I guess in a sense you could say it is, but again, they were saying that in order to make the case for weakening the monarchy, and if you're the monarchy, you're not interested in that. So Move Forward Party was dissolved, and the leadership has now just reformed and made a new party again. This will be the third time, the second time, and the third iteration of the party. It's going to be called the People's Party, which is an interesting name, because that was the name of the party that was founded after the overthrow of the monarchy back in the 1930s. So some interesting historical implications there as far as the choice of name for the party. It's especially ironic when you consider that the monarchy in the 1930s was overthrown with the support of the military, which at that time was a noted anti-monarchist institution in Thailand. Yeah, the military has since changed tack. They see the monarchy as a useful tool to try to maintain their own hold on power. Keep in mind, the military is actually more powerful as an institution in Thailand than the monarchy. So once the military became the paramount institution, at that point, they became much more tolerant of the monarchy. They saw it as a natural ally against various dissidents in the country. So what the questioner was asking about was some recent events that had to do with the prime minister stepping down. The prime minister that was chosen to lead the coalition between Thaksin Shinawat's party and the conservative monarchists / military parties was a member of Thaksin Shinawat's party. And his name was Sreta? Something like that. I think I had his name here somewhere. I don't have it in front of me. Well, regardless, the previous guy had charges brought against him regarding, ethics, ironically. Basically, the accusation was that he had tried to appoint someone who had served a jail time, and that was considered, quote unquote, unethical to the point where the court ruled that the prime minister needed to step down, which he then did. So his replacement has been, let me see if I can pronounce her name here, Phaethongthan Shinawat, the daughter of Thaksin Shinawat. She's pretty young. I think she's in her 30s, thereabouts. So relatively inexperienced. She's not noted for being like a big politico. The main reason she's, in the party at all is basically because she's just the founder's daughter. And it's not as though she didn't wield, it's not as though she was powerless before. She did have a senior position, but she was not the person that people relied on to get things done. That kind of fell to older members of the party who were more experienced in politics and had stronger chops for that job. But the guy that was the most experienced had been Sreta, and then when he was thrown out, that was kind of a problem for the party because they didn't really have a lot of other senior people that they trusted to fill that position. So the daughter of the founder is now the default choice, became the default choice, and so now she's prime minister. How long that's going to last, who's to say? Like Thaksin Shinawat's governments generally don't last too long, maybe a couple years at most before the military is turned on them, but circumstances have changed. And now there's a much bigger reformist threat that the government, that the conservatives are facing. So it may be that this particular iteration of Thaksin Shinawat's government may actually last much longer. So is that nepotism? Yeah, kind of, but it's also pretty much normal. It's what you would expect in a political system like that, where you have strong patrons overseeing large patronage networks, right? It's that kind of model is very much a family business predicated on trust.
Right.
Yeah, the idea of having a political party that is not led by just one guy who controls everything, but is rather a movement that is popular with a broad segment of the population and that elects its leaders based off of merit and popularity, that's a pretty recent idea. Like, even in the West, that's still relatively new. And it's pretty rare to see that in developing countries. You'll see reformist parties pop up that have support of the middle class here and there, occasionally in different countries. But the trouble is that the middle class in those territories, in those countries, is generally too small to really make too big of a difference. They can apply pressure. Sometimes they can influence the direction of policymaking, but it's pretty rare for them to win power. Even if they do win power, it's even rarer for them to hang on to it. So, I think we talked last time about how to build like strong democratic institutions, and my answer mostly centered around strong middle class that is, has a lot of political power. That's one of the core prerequisites. So in these sort of developing countries that have weaker political systems, reformists can come to the fore, but they generally encounter very strong institutional opposition from vested interests. Move Forward Party has found that out several times now. They have successfully become like a popular movement with the leadership that is not defined by a cult of personality, but a set of ideals and policies that people want to see implemented. And the resistance they've met has resulted in the party being dissolved outright 2 times. Some of their senior leaders have been arrested. One of their major allies defected, basically because of a bribe from their enemy. Like, it's pretty gnarly. Politics in developing countries can be very red of tooth and claw. So, they definitely are having to fight in order to achieve their objectives here. They could yet win. Thailand is not nearly as bad as a lot of developing countries. Whatever else can be said of Thailand, it's not an authoritarian political system. They do give some scope for free discourse and for individuals to engage in politics. It's much more difficult than it needs to be, on purpose, I would point out, but it can happen. And the fact that there's an opposition at all that has wide support and has managed to challenge the established vested interest in the country so much that those vested interests have taken such pronounced action against them is testament to the relative strength of civil society in Thailand. Whether or not it's going to be enough to actually implement change and actually achieve further liberalization of the political system, that's the big question right now. That remains to be seen. But they are at least on the right track. So you have to give him credit for that much, at least. But we'll see where it goes from here. There's certainly never been a lack of drama in Thai politics. Thailand, I think, holds the record for most military coups overthrowing the government, if I'm not mistaken.
So they're pretty good at it.
Well, that's one way of looking at it.
So Thai politics continuing to be interesting.
Oh, yeah.
Then the other country people asked for an update for was Bangladesh.
There's not much to update there. There's still, the new interim government is basically still trying to get set up. The new prime minister is still appointing people. I think I read that he appointed a new head of the central bank, for example. So that's, the process of filling out all of the ministries and whatnot with his people. That's ongoing. And I think they're still making progress on trying to restore law and order, getting the police back out on the streets and that kind of thing. I read that the army is basically doing local security at this point, so it's not too bad, but eventually you are going to need the police out there. Soldiers are not policemen. They're not trained to do that. They're trained to kill people and blow things up. So they do not make ideal policemen. It's better to have just trained police than soldiers out on the street. So right now they're kind of in the process of trying to coax police back. They've been targeted for violence since the government was overthrown or collapsed, or however you want to frame that. So a lot of them have not been coming in to work. So it'll probably take a little more time to get them back. We'll see how that works out. But beyond that, there's no new developments that I'm really aware of. I think they are talking about trying to hold new elections, but it's not clear when. Obviously, people would rather they happen sooner rather than later. But I was also reading today that the government, the interim government, doesn't think that they're going to be able to hold it like in a matter of months. Because the issue is that the previous government basically ended this informal agreement by which elections would be overseen by impartial overseers. They would kind of hand responsibility to that to some kind of neutral third party appointees. So it's not clear if they're going to do that again, or if they're going to try to set up some new arrangement. Again, it's all undecided. And regardless, the government needs more time to, again, man all of its positions before it can even really think about that. Like the electoral institutions need new appointees. Keep in mind that the previous government under Sheikh Hasina and the Awami League had held power for like 10 years. So most of the government was basically just Awami League allies and appointees. So given that they've basically been overthrown in a revolution, like all of those people are going to have to leave. I don't think the new government, certainly not the student protesters, are going to accept their presence. And while that could be good for the future of Bangladesh, the problem it's going to introduce is that it's going to just hollow out the government for a while. Like administrative capacity is not going to be there. Like you can't fire broad swaths of a government's workforce and then expect them to do the same stuff that they were doing to the same degree. It's going to take time to replace all of those people. And until then, things are going to be a little bit shaky and chaotic. And shaky and chaotic are not like good conditions to hold an election under. Bangladesh is pretty shaky and chaotic in the best of times anyway. So I don't think the government is going to hold elections like until things settle down, and that could take months. That could take like 6 months, maybe even a year, depending on how much they want to revamp the government and replace everybody. So, they're talking about maybe 2 years before another election. And, student protesters may be willing to accept that as the price of reform. But the major institutional actor that everybody is kind of watching here is not the student protesters, it's actually the BNP, the Bangladeshi Nationalist Party, which had been the main opposition party to Sheikh Hasina's Awami League. And, the protesters kind of have a wonky relationship with them. The BNP and its supporters were part of the protests, but the BNP is itself filled with corrupt political actors who don't necessarily care about what's best for the country. And I think a lot of the protesters in particular do not want to trade one devil for another, right? Getting the Awami League, but then getting the BNP in return is not like an improvement for them. Mm-hmm. So people are really kind of keeping an eye on the BNP right now, because if the BNP wanted to, they could claim that the interim government does not have democratic legitimacy, and they could have their people out on the streets protesting. And it wouldn't have the same legitimacy as like the student protest movement that overthrew the Awami League, but they could still introduce significant instability if they wanted to. And it's not clear how the student protesters would react, or even if there is anything they could really do about that if it did. So the ball is kind of in the BNP's court right now. Like, for now, they've been pretty quiet and been willing to kind of wait and give the interim government some time to set up. That probably has more to do with fear of the military, though, and not so much concern with public opinion or the student protesters. If the military wants to crack down, they could, and they kind of hold the high cards. They pretty much always have in Bangladesh. But if the interim government starts engaging in like politics, announces election, or otherwise starts implementing controversial policies, the BNP is almost certainly going to jump on that. And at that point, you could see some more fireworks. Keep in mind, one of the divides between the Awami League and the BNP, other than the fact that they were just led by opposing corrupt patrons, the heads of patronage networks, there was also something of an ideological divide. It's not as though Bangladesh was bereft of something resembling normal politics. The Awami League was technically, the party that founded the country. They were the ones that had been leading Bangladesh when it was still a part of Pakistan. But more to the point, their ideology had always been more socialist and secular. That was more sort of the crux of their campaign platform. The BNP, by contrast, was less statist. The the center of politics in Bangladesh, as well as just South Asia in general, is pretty statist. So, you know, you don't see a lot of like libertarians or American-style Republicans there. But on the spectrum of political ideology in Bangladesh, the BNP is kind of to the right. So less statist as far as the economy, and also much more socially conservative. The BNP itself is not Islamist. You know, socially conservative, yes. Islamist, no. However, some of their coalition allies, some of the political parties they're allied to, actually are Islamist parties. And some of them were led by guys who had actually fought with the Pakistani army against the people fighting in Bangladesh for Bangladesh's independence. As you can imagine, those people are not very popular. And opponents of the BNP have never failed to point out the fact that they are allies of the people who had opposed the founding of the country. To give you an idea of how slow the judicial system is in South Asian countries, one of the major leaders of the pro-Pakistani militias that operated in Bangladesh, I think they were called Razakers, if I'm not mistaken. One of the leaders of those groups was actually had charges brought against him in the 1970s, a couple years after independence. And he was eventually found guilty of, you know, a whole litany of crimes. Of, you know, there was a bunch of human rights abuses during the War of Independence, in which a lot of these Islamist militias allied with Pakistan targeted like civilians, intellectuals, you know, basically not just people who were actually fighting, just communities in general that were suspected of being anti-Pakistan and pro-independence. So he was found guilty. I don't remember if he was sentenced to death or not, but you know, he was given a lengthy sentence regardless. He's in jail. But here's the thing: the charges were brought in the 1970s, but he was not actually finally found guilty. In other words, the trial did not conclude until I think about 5 to 10 years ago. So it took decades to get that case completed.
Damn.
And that's just how slow the judicial system in South Asia is. The problem is that they have a massive caseload. You know, the population of South Asia is like 2 billion people, something like that. It's just massive. And the administrative capacity of states in South Asia is not massive. And so that incongruency between capacity and demand results in the judicial system being extremely sluggish. You know, even just the most basic of cases can drag out for years and years. Just a little tangent for you. But regardless, the BNP, it's relatively conservative, less statist, more socially conservative, etc. And so, you know, while people, especially the protesters, are happy to see the Awami League go, that doesn't mean they want to see like a conservative government allied with Islamists come to power. You know, they're not necessarily pro-BNP. Mm-hmm. And so that's created some new tensions between the protesters and supporters of the BNP. And that could be the foundation for future fireworks in Bangladesh. I don't think the Awami League is going to come back anytime soon, but we could see some kind of new schism emerge in Bangladesh as the protesters perhaps turn on the BNP and then try to prevent them from coming to power. I think I did read recently that some student protesters were actually going to set up a reformist pro-student protester party. So that could hypothetically challenge the established parties for power. But like I just finished talking about, like reformist parties like that generally struggle. Like it's going to be hard going for them. You know, the Awami League and the BNP have been around a long time. They know politics, and patronage is a big part of the Bangladeshi political culture. So, you know, if you run into a competition with those kinds of entities saying, I'm not going to be corrupt, I'm not going to disperse patronage, I'm going to try to run the government as honestly as possible, that's going to sound great to the middle class, but it's not going to sound great to all of the poor, poverty-stricken communities that have come to depend on patronage from the corrupt established political parties. So you may not be able to win an election against entities like that know how to play the game. So unless they get real smart real fast about the realities of politics in a country like Bangladesh, I don't think their chances are all that good. Which again is why I think that there could be a major confrontation with the BNP when elections are finally held again. So that's a long-winded way of saying we'll see. Everything is still uncertain right now in Bangladesh, and it's not clear what direction things are going to go. For now, things are pretty quiet, so people are kind of optimistic, but, anybody's guess. It all kind of comes down to the interim government, the military, and the BNP at this point.
Did we have any update on Ukraine? People were asking about the offensive and if there were any implications for that.
I mean, not really. My big question as far as the Kursk offensive is how far does the Ukrainian army go? And how much of that territory do they try to hold, if any? Mm-hmm. But that's pretty much exactly the same as what I said last time, right? Those are my main questions right now. If they try to hold it, they could try to use it as leverage in peace negotiations to get some of their land and provinces back, but it's questionable whether or not they would be able to hold it. Right? That's going to be challenging, given their lack of resources. On the other hand, they could just they could just withdraw and not try to hold it. That would certainly save them manpower and resources, but then it also means that they lose any leverage they might have gotten from hanging on to it. Mm-hmm. So I suspect that's the strategic dilemma that they're struggling with right now. There's probably a lot of debate about it within Kiev. But I don't have much else to say besides that. I think they did blow a bridge that led to Kursk. Some kind of strategic bridge that the Russian army had been using to send resources to their units on the front line in Kursk. So that does suggest that, two things. One, it suggests that the Ukrainian army is going to try to keep pushing forward for now. Certainly blowing up a bridge to disrupt the logistics of your opponent implies that, you're not just going to leave. But the other big thing it signals is that they're going to use Western weapons in the offensive within Russia. And I kind of wonder whether or not the offensive isn't at least partly justified in the minds of the Ukrainian government in terms of its ability to prove to the West that Ukraine can use Western weapons offensively, not only against Russia, but in Russia, and then not have that spin out into a escalatory spiral that leads to some kind of nuclear confrontation. Because there has been a lot of discussion about Western inhibitions. The opposite, rather. Western caveats, issues with the Ukrainians using Western-supplied weapons in Russia itself. There's been lots of restrictions on the use of those weapons in that regard. So by blitzing into Russia, using Western weapons, notably, and then using Western ranged fires of one kind or another to disrupt the supplies of Russian units fighting in Kursk, the Ukrainians are basically giving the West an ultimatum and saying, okay, well, we're going to use these weapons you're giving us in Russia itself. Supposedly they did not tell Western partners that they were going to do that. So that is a kind of ultimatum saying, like, look, we're going to do this, and oh, hey, look, nothing happened, right? There's been no overarching escalation. So, like, it's safe. You can let us do this. Please send us more stuff. So I think the operation partly serves that purpose. And I think there has been some notice of that in the West. They're not entirely happy that Ukraine kind of did that to them, but on the other hand, it has been recognized that there has not been escalation in that regard, and that this could open the door to further support and supply of weapons that previously Western governments had been a little bit reluctant to send, and to do so without the restrictions that have been a noted element in the supply of weapons thus far.
We shall see. We've had Bitter Sugar visit the stream in the past week, so...
How's he doing?
He's doing well, as far as I could tell.
Did he ever get drafted?
I don't believe so. I think his education level is high enough that he's needed for, like, more sciencey work.
Okay. Makes sense.
Yes.
I think I did have some corrections from last time. I think it was Fuzzy Cord pointed out that Telegram is not technically a Russian app. Mm-hmm. Apparently, it was actually started in the UK and is still run from the UK. So technically, it's a British app, but the user base is heavily Russian. and it has a strong user base in Eastern Europe generally as well, I believe. So, yes, it's not Russian, but most of its content is in Russian. Most of its users are Russian, so I guess you could say it's Russian in everything but name. Also, I found when I read about it that it was actually founded by the same Russian guys who founded VKontakte, which is actually Russia's equivalent to Facebook. And apparently, if Wikipedia is anything to go by, they left Russia because they didn't like how the government was intruding on VKontakte's operation. They thought that the Russian government had effectively nationalized it. So they didn't appreciate that, so they left the company and then left Russia entirely, moved to the UK, and then started up Telegram.
Nice. Fuzzy Code said that it was not his correction, though.
Oh, who was it?
Not sure.
It was one of you guys. It was one of you big name mod guys.
Maybe Moss or Sea of Whiskey. Unsure. I think Fuzzy Cord has sent along a couple questions, too, when you're done with the corrections.
Oh, okay. I will take a look. The other correction... Oh, wait. I already did that one. Never mind. That was the correction from last week, when I was talking about how Israel had assassinated the head of Hamas in Tehran, not the head of Hezbollah. Okay. Let's see. Okay, yeah, I see. Yeah, we got some questions here. Kursk. Yeah, we just talked about Kursk. Well, I guess this question is a little bit different. So, what on God's green earth is Ukraine hoping to achieve with their incursion to Russia? Because that's bold or desperate. So the main reasons, at least as analysts I've read have discussed, the main objectives are to, one, pull Russian units away from Donbass. Russian offensive operations in Donbass have been ongoing for the past, I want to say, like 6, maybe 8 months or so. And they've been slowly but steadily gaining ground incrementally over that time period. So there's a desire to try to alleviate the pressure on that particular front by opening up a new front that'll force the Russians to redeploy forces, hopefully away from Donbass. That's part of the justification. Two, like I just mentioned, they want to take some land so that they can have a better negotiating position when and if peace negotiations ever start. And also, there's a kind of an intangible factor, an intangible objective, you might say, which is to just humiliate the Putin government. Russia is supposed to be like a major power, so if they invade a smaller, weaker country, there's not supposed to be a point in that conflict when the other country invades them. So it is a little weird that this country that pretends to be so powerful now is being invaded. The penetration may not go very far, but the fact that it's happening at all is notable. And Putin has not appreciated it from what little we've seen of his response. From what little we've seen of his response to it.
Yeah, if you think about it just from an RTS standpoint, by virtue of representing that they can attack across the border, that means that Russia can no longer think of a purely offensive operation. They also have to take some account of defense, which makes it a lot more complicated.
And honestly, surprise attacks like this are one of the biggest advantages Ukraine can bring to bear in the conflict. Because whatever advantages the Russian military has, dynamism is not one of them. As we've talked about before, the Russian military's leadership is very slow to react. The decision-making process is very sclerotic. And that means if you can do something that surprises them, you're going to have a lot of room to take initiative, because it's going to take them forever to respond to it in any substantive way. And we've kind of seen that in Kursk. Like, the Kursk offensive has been ongoing for weeks now, but the Russian response has been pretty slow. Like, they have mobilized units to send there, but a lot of them have been like conscripts taken from other parts of Russia, which has actually been pretty controversial. You're not supposed to send conscripts into combat. There was like a rule implemented in Russia decades ago to that effect, because people didn't like, their children being sent and go and fight and die in some war somewhere, Chechnya, Afghanistan, whatever. But because the Russian government just didn't have units available in Kursk to contain the breach, they kind of resorted to just conscripts, and that's gone about as well as you would expect. A lot of them have been captured or killed thus far, and a lot of families are very upset about it. Probably not enough to really challenge the government, but it is a further embarrassment for Moscow. The Russian military will mobilize and respond eventually. It's not like they're doing nothing, but because the decision-making process is so slow, like, it's going to be a while. It'll probably be like a further couple weeks or so before they've got like substantive forces redeployed in the right positions to actually do anything. And in the meantime, the Ukrainian army can just go ham against whatever thinned out defenses are available in the region. So surprises like that exploit the weakness in your enemy's decision making and leadership, like, that's definitely an advantage Ukraine has used before and is using now, and will probably use again if given the opportunity.
Yeah, the way that I would describe it is they have the advantage of having a smaller, more maneuverable military force that can react faster to things because their chain of command is not scared shitless of being axed because you made the wrong call and upset the leader.
Fairly accurate. But one of the problems the Ukrainian army has is that it is technically a legacy institution of the Red Army. And while they have made extensive efforts to reform the Ukrainian army as an institution over the past 10 years, there's still officers in there that are very much old-fashioned, basically guys that have more of a Soviet mindset that is slower to react and is more risk-averse. And that's been a noted problem by some of the guys fighting on the ground. There was a big backlash when Zelensky announced that he was going to fire the head of the army. I can't remember his name. I want to say it started with a K, but he was pretty popular. He was seen as a straight talker, a reformer, and a guy who knew how to do his job well, who was very much not of the old Soviet school, but there was some tension between him and Zelensky, especially with the general in question speaking out that the leadership wasn't doing enough to get more supplies from the West. And that eventually led to his removal. And he was replaced with a guy called Siersky, I think, who had a reputation for kind of being more loyal to Zelensky, but also for being an old-fashioned, like, Red Army type general that was very risk-averse and did not know how to be dynamic on the battlefield as far as his leadership. So a lot of veterans and soldiers on the ground were not excited to see Siersky come in. They thought that was definitely a downgrade as far as the quality of leadership. So yes, the Russian army definitely has problems as far as leadership, and the Ukrainian army overall is better in that regard, but they actually share some of the same disadvantages and issues as the Russians, especially amongst some of the older officers.
That makes sense. They have a shared military heritage.
Let's see. So why did the Turkish parliament get their biff on? I read it was to do with a member of the opposition being jailed. I don't know what biff means. So you'll have to elaborate on that.
What does it mean to get one's biff on? Does anyone in the chat know?
I guess I'm not up with the slang. I'm too old now and aged.
To throw haymakers, to box, to beef, to punch up, to biff.
Oh, I hadn't heard of that. There was a fight in Parliament.
Oh, I don't know. Maybe they mean figurative conflict, not actual physical fisticuffs.
Yeah, I focus more on wars, not altercations. Yeah, I didn't see anything in the news about it, so I can't comment on it. I guess I'll look into it. I'm curious now.
There was a physical fight, chat's confirming, yeah.
Gotcha. Yeah, that happens sometimes. You notice it more so in developing countries, occasionally in developed countries.
Dude, do you remember the doctor versus lawyer fight in Pakistan? Let's go.
Well, to be fair, that wasn't in their parliament, but yeah, I do remember that.
Ninja versus pirate, old hat. Doctor versus lawyer boxing. Let's go.
Yeah, it was pretty wild footage. But yeah, I don't know what happened in Turkey. Probably just some personal thing. Somebody with a grudge, or somebody who felt his honor had been insulted. You know, a lot of the guys who serve in parliament in countries with like corrupt patronage networks in charge, they tend to have big egos, right? You know, these are political bosses of one kind or another. So, you know, they tend to have big boss mentalities, and it's not hard to piss them off. So, you know, it could have just been as simple as somebody saying something that they didn't like, and that just spiraled out into a fist fight. But I'll look into it. The real answer is I don't know. Actually, that's probably a good cue for the usual disclaimer. I'm not an expert in everything I talk about on here. It's, you know, more painful at some time, more painfully obvious at some times than others. So, you know, if I ever say anything wrong, stupid, or biased, please do let me know. If I'm wrong, I want to know more than anybody. So participation by chat is encouraged in that regard. I don't read chat while we do this, but I will see it eventually, and I do enjoy the feedback.
And I'm here to help with the boomer-zoomer relations.
Let's see. This was a while back, but did WD ever cover the conviction of Bob Menendez? Yeah, we talked about it a bit. Not a whole lot, because the case was still pretty new when it hit the news. Yeah, this was the senator that was convicted of bribery. He was the guy with the bribe gold. Got it from Egypt, took it home, Googled how much is X amount of gold worth, you know, that kind of dumb shit. Yeah, the FBI raided his house, and they found gold, like, in his closet, in his clothes, just kind of scattered around in random places. It was pretty hilarious.
Did you get bribed? No. Why do you have gold in all of your drawers? I don't know. Doesn't everyone? No. Most people don't.
Yeah, it was pretty brazen. Yeah, the Democratic Party asked him to step down, and he actually said no and tried to run for election again. And yeah, that didn't happen. So I think he finally did give up. He's almost certainly going to jail. The stupid thing about the case is that it's not even really clear what they were bribing him for. Like, supposedly it was for favorable policy, but the Senate Foreign Relations Committee doesn't have all that much power as far as foreign policy. Like, they can complain to the executive, but, you know, beyond that, like, what good is it going to do to bribe one of them? It doesn't. It seems like a pretty weak strategy as far as influencing foreign policy to me. But I guess somebody in Egypt thought it was worthwhile. They gave him literal bars of gold, Neuro. Like, how obvious can you be?
That's awesome. It does require you to do a quest to be able to access the money, though. I'm kind of thinking about that. Like, if they give you bars of gold, you can't just go to the store and be like, here, I would like to pay for it with these. Maybe you could, but you would have to do a roll for it. It's not legal tender. At least not at normal vendors and so on.
Yeah. You'd have to find a way to convert it somehow. You could probably do it. I imagine there's got to be ways to do it, like, on the down low. But obviously, I think Menendez's problem isn't that he didn't know how to do that. I think his problem is that he just got caught too soon. Got caught with his gold in his pants, quite literally. But yeah, I don't think we talked about it too much more than that. I don't think there's been too many new developments either. I don't think there's been a conviction, for example. I think the trial is still ongoing. I think that's all the questions we had.
Thank you, chat, for your questions.
Do we have anything else in here? Oh. Yeah, Japan was in the news.
What do they do?
The Prime Minister announced that he would not run for the leadership of his party in September. when there's going to be an election for party leadership. So effectively, he's stepping down as prime minister. So that was notable. Yeah, he's pretty unpopular right now. I mean, not just him, really. The whole Liberal Democratic Party in Japan is pretty unpopular right now, mostly because of a whole string of political scandals. I think everybody remembers the Unification Church scandal at this point. For those of you who are maybe not familiar with that, back in, God, has it been 2 years already? It's a couple years ago, Shinzo Abe, former prime minister of Japan, was assassinated. He was shot to death while he was doing a rally. And when they caught the guy who did it, he said that it was a revenge killing because Shinzo Abe, allegedly, was involved in corrupt dealings with a church called the Unification Church. And the Unification Church apparently has a long history of getting involved in politics, not only in Japan, but in South Korea, and to a lesser degree, the United States. And apparently the LDP in Japan had a lot of relations with them. You know, a lot of money changed hands, etc. And his mother had been a member of the Unification Church, but apparently the church is a little bit predatory as far as its membership, and she ended up giving all of her money to the church, just giving it away. And she ended up penniless. And the church didn't really do anything for her when she was in poverty as a result. And by extension, her son had quite the grudge, which he took out on Shinzo Abe, fatally so. So the result of that was not, as you might think, you know, consolidation around, you know, nonviolent political norms, condemnation of the killing, etc., although that did happen to a degree. Rather, there was a lot of questions about the Unification Church, and it turned out that there were significant links uncovered when journalists started investigating it. And so the result then was actually legislation curbing the freedom and independence of major religious institutions like the Unification Church. So ironically, the assassin actually succeeded beyond his wildest dreams as far as curbing the power of the Unification Church. His revenge has extended beyond the mere assassination of Shinzo Abe, but to the institutional targeting of the Unification Church. So it's probably one of the most successful acts of political extremism in modern history as a result.
What was the church about? Like, is it a branch of Christianity? What's the...
Sorry, what was that?
What kind of church is it?
Oh, Christian.
Christian.
Nominally Christian, I would add. It's actually more of a cult of personality around the guy who founded the church. I don't remember his name, but I think he was a Korean guy. Mm-hmm. Very, very anti-communist, Christian fundamentalist guy. Obviously, you know, Washington liked him during the Cold War. Mm-hmm. A natural ally, you might say. And because he kind of used the money from his church/cult to fund various anti-communist parties and movements and causes and whatnot, he got a fair amount of discretion as far as, you know, abusing his followers and whatnot from this, that, and the other government. Mm-hmm. And that lasted for, you know, decades through the Cold War and then after. But yeah, it's not like a real denomination of Christianity. It's like just one guy sort of running a, what do you call it, a megachurch type operation? Kind of one of those deals.
Yeah, where you've got like 3,000 plus members at a time. Very charismatic leadership, a lot of outpouring of money and stuff.
Yeah, kind of like that, but on the scale of nations instead of like local megachurches. Mm-hmm. So he was quite big and quite politically influential in East Asia as a result. And that worked fine until, you know, this one guy brought media attention to the church, and now, you know, they're basically untouchable. Like, it's no politician wants to kind of associate with them because they're seen as toxic. Mm-hmm. So their political influence in Japan has been significantly curbed as a result.
Interesting.
So that was a major scandal, and because the LDP in particular was implicated for its ties to the Unification Church, they were harmed disproportionately. So that was one major scandal that undermined the LDP. There's been a number of others. Let's see, in 2023, the Prime Minister fired his son, who had been employed as his personal executive secretary. Apparently, he had to fire him after it emerged that his son had misused his position to throw a party at a prime ministerial residence.
That's funny.
So not major corruption per se, but abuse of authority, and it's the kind of thing that kind of rubs people the wrong way.
Unless you went to
especially-
the party and had a good time.
There you go. December 2020. Oh, that must be December 2023. 4 cabinet ministers had to quit because of allegations that LDP leaders were pocketing millions of dollars in party funds. That included key allies of the prime minister and then several junior ministers. There was a further investigation by public prosecutors, and apparently the LDP eventually revealed that 85 of its members had failed to properly report their income. So that was another big scandal. April 2024, 2 lawmakers from the LDP had to resign, one because he was accused of buying votes, and the other was implicated in a fundraising probe. And because they resigned, there were 2 by-elections, and the LDP lost both of them, to give you an idea of how unpopular these scandals make them. Let's see, this past July, the Defense Ministry had a bunch of allegations of, well, 3 major allegations at the same time. Mishandling confidential and sensitive information. Washington in particular is not going to like that one. Harassment of subordinates, and fraud. And as a result, there was a slew of disciplinary measures, suspensions, and dismissals. So by July, the LDP's approval rating had hit rock bottom. It's at 19%. Or it was at 19% in July. God knows where it is right now. That's the lowest it's been since the year 2000, according to a survey by Asahi Shimba. I have no idea how to pronounce that. But it's very low. So they're doing really bad in polls, and the party leadership is apparently borderline panicking because they do not know how to fix this. There's been a number of attempts to fix it, but all of them have failed. Prime Minister Kishida actually appeared in front of a political ethics committee to try to show good faith, but then he didn't really say anything, and he sounded very uncertain when he was speaking, and so that kind of made left a bad impression on a lot of people. This past June, the LDP passed some reforms to election funding to try to respond to some of the corruption allegations regarding that. But the public was very skeptical, apparently. So they didn't give him credit for that. They think that they're just going to find other loopholes and keep doing exactly what they were doing before. Let's see. The LDP also introduced a temporary tax relief scheme to try to ease the impact of inflation, which is a major complaint in Japan right now. But the public didn't think it went far enough. So basically a Band-Aid. So the LDP basically just can't get out of its own way. It just keeps doing shit that pisses off the public, and then when it tries to fix things, it's just kind of seen as feckless and self-interested. So in all likelihood, the LDP is going to hit a wall in the next election, and you might well actually see an opposition party win power in Japan again. Which may not sound like a big deal if you're not familiar with Japanese politics, but consider that since the end of World War II, when the new democratic government was created in Japan, the opposition has only won power in Japan twice in that time. I think once was it very early on in the 50s or 60s, and then it happened again in the 90s. Actually, I think it happened again in the aughts or maybe early 2010s, so maybe 3 times. So if the opposition does manage to win power in this upcoming election, it'll only be for the 4th time in 70 years. So it's a big deal in that sense. The LDP generally doesn't drop the ball this badly, but they've really been struggling for the past couple years. And the interesting thing for me is that even the factions within the LDP have not been able to respond or take advantage of this. Because normally, the real politics of Japan happens within the LDP. There's a whole bunch of different factions within the party that are basically parties unto themselves that jockey for power within the party and to set the party's agenda. And you would think that with Kishida in power, then his faction would take a hit and that other factions would try to move in, take over, and present themselves as a new alternative. But the trouble is that a lot of these corruption scandals have actually involved all of the major factions within the LDP, such that no one of them can actually take advantage of it by claiming that they're the faction that's not corrupt. They're all corrupt, pretty much. The two major ones, anyway, have all been implicated, and so there's been no room to maneuver there for anybody. Like, nobody can take advantage of that. There's some smaller factions within the party that have not been implicated in corruption scandals, but they're too small to really leverage that into any kind of gain as far as party leadership. I actually read that Kushida went so far as to announce that he was going to dissolve his own faction within the party as a result of the corruption allegations, to try to appease the public's anger over the corruption allegations. And apparently the other major faction, again, there's two in the party, apparently their leaders felt that if Kushida was going to do it, then they would have to do it too. And so they announced that they too were going to, dissolve their faction. I would point out that these are kind of informal groups, so it doesn't really mean anything to dissolve them formally. Technically they existed to a formal degree somewhat, but really it's down to personal relationships. And obviously, regardless of whatever kind of formal recognition they may or may not have now, those personal relationships are going to continue. So the dissolution of factions is basically meaningless in that sense. Like, in effect, they still exist, most likely. And I think the Japanese public kind of knows that and was not correspondingly very impressed with the announcement. But the fact that he tried it at all, I thought, was pretty interesting. I don't think I've ever seen that before, where a major faction of a major dominant party just announces that it's going to just die. We don't exist anymore. I've never heard of that.
We'd like to report to all of you that we are done. Staying hydrated sounds good to me.
Yeah, I need it.
We were out rollerblading in the LA sun today, so good to get some hydration.
Yeah. Cold water tastes very, very good when you're out in the heat.
Absolutely does. They did have some water stations at various points.
Oh, fancy.
Yeah.
Well, what did you think of Harris's economic plan?
I didn't see it. What's the short version?
The short version is the only version I have, because that's the only version she's given, effectively. Yeah, she announced it at one of her rallies recently. And, yeah, it's pretty much the usual bullshit. Like, most likely none of it is actually going to happen. And it seems much more designed for political consumption than for public policy. So I don't really take it all that seriously, quite honestly. But for what it's worth, it does give at least an outline of her leanings, so to speak. So one thing she announced, $25,000 for quote-unquote eligible first-time home buyers. She did not deign to define what constituted eligibility, and most likely she won't. That's kind of what you might call a weasel word. You can try to get the benefit of announcing that you're going to give money to first-time home buyers, but then if anybody questions whether or not it's affordable, you can say, well, it's only going to be to eligible first-time home buyers. Mm-hmm. It's a nice little policy designed for people who are complaining about how expensive housing is. This is her way of trying to signal that she wants to help those people, even though it's almost certainly not going to happen. Tax credit for builders of homes sold to first-time buyers. I'm not even entirely sure how that would work, because that kind of implies that if you're a home builder, then you would have to apply for the tax credit after the house has been built, and then you can get it. So I'm sure they'll take the money. I'm sure they'll be pleased with that, but I imagine they would rather have money saved at the start of the process than at the end of the process. That might be a stronger incentive, since you don't know how long it'll take to sell a house after you build it. It could be a while. Yeah. So if you can save money earlier in the process during construction, that'll incentivize more people to build, and it'll be better for the finances of what firms there are building. Let's see, reinstating the COVID child tax credit. So during the pandemic, the government implemented a child tax credit that gave how much money? A couple $1,000s to people with children. I think for each child, if I'm not mistaken. In her case, it would be increased to as much as $3,600. So
Maybe getting some
it's not
support from family there.
Yeah, exactly. It's expensive to raise a family, especially with all the inflation. So here's money. Enjoy. Vote for me. Let's see. Giving families a $6,000 tax credit the year they have a new child. So same thing, kind of a natalist pro-family policy. It's not going to increase birth rates, but, again, it's more about the signaling than it is about the substance. Let's see, capping the monthly price of diabetes drug insulin at $35 for everyone. Economists do not like price ceilings. So this one in particular came in for vitriol from academia. Lots of economists came out and said, yeah, that's a dumb idea, don't do that. But of course, healthcare is a big issue in the United States, and the price of insulin has kind of been the go-to reference point for people trying to highlight how unfair and, let's say, inequitable the American healthcare system is. So this is another focus group policy. This is the kind of thing that'll appeal to people who advocate for this kind of change, especially people who are just in general frustrated with the high cost of healthcare. But again, it's not going to pass muster with public policy people. And again, I don't think it'll actually pass if she does become president. Here's a fun one. This is a politician's policy right here. Quote, finding ways to cancel medical debt, end quote. I love that. There's so much ambiguity in that statement that it's impossible to fail, right? You can't really fault that. What are you going to do? I'm going to do something to reduce medical debt. Cool. Thanks.
We haven't decided what it is yet, but as soon as we figure that out, we'll let you know.
Let's see. She urged action on a bill in Congress that would bar property owners from using services that, quote unquote, coordinate rents. So that's another one for the people worried about the high cost of housing. It's also kind of a weird one to make when you're running for president, because that's a bill being considered right now. So I guess you could say that if you vote for me as president, then when I'm president, I'll totally not veto that bill. But that bill could actually pass right now, within months, in which case it's kind of a moot point. So this is more about signaling support for a particular type of policy, again, trying to lower housing costs, than it is about trying to substantively deal with the problem. Let's see, crackdown on price gouging in grocery stores. This is another fun one that economists don't like. She's talking about a federal ban on price gouging on food and groceries. And that's the kind of thing that'll be popular with people on a budget who have been particularly struggling with how much inflation there's been in their grocery bill over the past couple of years. But at the same time, as economists will tell you, price gouging at grocery stores hasn't really been a thing. That's not a thing that exists. So this is another kind of made-up policy designed to solve a problem that doesn't exist, but that a lot of people are convinced actually does exist. So pandering to the crowd of the first order, you could say. So that's about all I had from the articles I read. Well, from the article I read, from her announcement. Again, it's all very political, and there's not a lot of meat here as far as like substantive public policy. It's hypothetically possible that some of it could be implemented if Democrats manage to retain control of the Senate and gain control of the House of Representatives, but that seems pretty unlikely. The trend over the past couple decades has been of divided government in Washington. So, most likely her promises on this stuff will never actually be challenged, right? Well, will not actually get the chance to pass, let's put it like that, because of divided government. So that means that she'll have an excuse for when she doesn't do all of this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I tried to find some equivalent stuff for Trump, but there hasn't really been a whole lot. I think tariffs has been the main thing as far as like a substantive proposal for managing the economy. And then Trump also did the same thing that Harris did, basically. He said that if he were elected president, he would order his subordinates to deal with inflation. So, if you elect me, I will do something about inflation. I don't know what, but you should totally vote for me so that I can do it. Lots of bullshit these days in American politics. It's not very heartening, but pretty much what I would expect given where the rhetoric is. I will say this, one of the notable changes in American politics over the past 10 years is just how much populist / progressive economic policy has kind of moved more towards the norm. You know, people have been focusing more on how like traditional social conservatism is kind of returning as a force, and that there's been a stronger and stronger push in that direction. But the flip side of that is that there's also been a stronger push towards more intervention into the economy of one kind or another. That's also become more normal. Basically, it's just kind of a backlash to the whole neoliberal period, where you had socially progressive but economically conservative policy basically rule the day. And so now the backlash is socially conservative and economically progressive. I don't know how coherent that'll remain or, you know, become, probably more like, but for now, that's the trend. You know, we'll kind of see where it goes, but that is notable, and you can see that in both Harris and Trump's campaign promises.
Yeah, trying to tackle people's perceived problems to catch votes rather than develop an actual master plan for fixing the country.
Yeah. I mean, that's just politics, right? You know, you have to campaign for the voters you have, not the voters you want. And, you know, if voters are not really all that interested in or well-versed in major public policy problems, you kind of just have to meet them where they are and give them policy proposals that they can understand, even if they may not be all that substantive. Mm-hmm. And I don't say that as an insult. Like, people spend their whole careers studying public policy, and it's challenging even for them. So I don't expect people who are like busy with their life responsibilities, working their 9 to 5, to just use what little spare time they have to go and do some kind of deep academic dive, you know, to do a literature review on like the latest and greatest about cost benefit analysis and minimum wage laws or stuff like that. Like it's a whole heavy lift to get familiar with any given individual public policy, let alone all of them. So, you know, you can't blame people for not being like super up on the newest research. And in turn, you can't really then be surprised that politicians kind of dumb down their messaging a little bit. You know, that's just kind of necessary. You have to do that. Ideally, civil society would pick up the slack by engaging in activism that could raise the general awareness of the public's understanding of various issues. But sometimes civil society does that, and other times they just take advantage, you know, of the information asymmetries there. That's just how the game gets played, unfortunately. You still there?
Yeah.
Okay. Making sure my computer didn't freeze again.
No, you're good.
That's how I realized it froze in the first place. I asked if you were listening, and you didn't answer.
Mm-hmm. We're so deep in thought processing it.
Yeah, it was weird. Like, all of my accessories still had power. Like, everything seemed to be working. I could even hear, like, the static from my headphone mic setup. Mm-hmm. But I just couldn't interact with the computer. It wasn't responding at all.
Oh, yeah. I had a funny keyboard mistake whenever I was setting up my new Windows. In StarCraft, a lot of pro gamers will lower their repeat rate for how often a key is spammed. So when you hold down the Zergling key, if you set it up correctly, you just get a whole bunch of them basically instantly. Mm-hmm. And I set these up, but there was one of the criteria in the registry edit that is called delay before acceptance. Mm-hmm. And that's the delay that Windows forces you to go through before it registers a key. So you press down the G key. I had it set to 1,000, which means it takes 1,000 seconds for it to register that press a key. Sorry, milliseconds. So 1 full second. That made it really hard to put in my password, basically impossible, when I logged back in. So I had to use the on-screen accessibility, like clicking keyboard. It's pretty funny. Eventually was able to figure it out. At first I thought it was a keyboard problem, but then I found out it was a Windows settings problem.
Yeah. Pity the poor StarCraft player trying to fiddle with his keyboard settings.
Yep. It works now, though. I'm pretty happy with it. Actually just got some flame from last game. Interesting passive-aggressive attacks. Love to see those. Oh, just I think a couple games in a row, player getting frustrated and then trying to throw an insult about how I haven't improved enough in the past 10 years. Which is fair, but my profession is an entertainer, not a StarCraft tournament player. A lot of people confuse the things.
Yeah. Prototypical online saltiness sounds like.
It's okay. We send love and kindness to others. A lot of times difficulty like that is just expressing frustration as a whole. I've talked about that with regards to Dota teammates and how a lot of people will be so at you with anger and emotion and stuff, and that's not all just from what you did in this match. A lot of that is just their resting anger level at life as a whole, and you happen to be their captive audience they can screech at for 45 minutes. So similarly in StarCraft, your opponent is someone who you can verbally punch at to vent. It's not the healthiest thing, but it can be done. And these games do put us under a lot of stress, so it's okay.
Well, did we have any more questions?
I'm not sure if we did. If we're all caught up, we could potentially flip over here pretty soon. See how Faerun is doing.
Yeah, where were we? Oh, go ahead.
We are in Act 2. We were kind of looking around some various areas because we only had an hour to play last time.
Oh, right.
Yeah, but I think we're to the point where we got the fairy blessing. Isabel and Jaheira are alive, and we could mess with Moonrise Towers or Gauntlet of Shar and stuff like that.
Oh, cool.
It's pretty funny having practiced so much with the honor mode run and with our run that in my current solo run I have such jacked characters for how much damage they can deal that I actually killed the hag before she was able to escape into her lair. Whenever she's in the tea house, we I have open hand monk, so I stunned her, and then we broke her out of invisibility with a shatter from my bard. So she was out of stealth and then stunned, and she died within the second turn. So she doesn't do shit after that. It misses all the dialogue. Like, the character's still mad that you killed the hag who was supposed to do something for her, but yeah. A little bit unsatisfying almost, because she doesn't use as many different abilities, but hey.
Yeah.
A win's a win, you'll take it.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, Monk is really, really powerful as he levels up.
Mm-hmm. The sound design of it, I love. Just the sounds of the punches feels very cool.
Yeah, BG3 definitely has good sound design. It's a pretty well-rounded game in that regard. Yeah, they are billions a little less well-rounded.
Mm-hmm.
You know, great gameplay, excellent score. Really loved the music, actually. But the voice acting is one of the weak points, I would say. So full credit to BG3 and its team for getting a well-rounded product out, especially one that is so expansive as it is. You know, to make a big game be consistently good in all areas, that's really hard.
Yep. So
they deserve a lot of credit for that. Well, what's the Fed gonna do, Neuro? They're going to raise interest rates, or lower interest rates, rather.
Why would they do that?
Because the economy is not really overheating like it was. Inflation is down, and there's some signs that there's tightening in labor markets. So that's got a lot of people predicting that the Fed is going to finally lower interest rates instead of raise them. Yeah, apparently a lot of the market is pricing that in now. So that's apparently why mortgage rates have been falling for the past couple months. So on the one hand, that's good because we want lower rates for houses and stuff. That helps the economy. On the other hand, if the Fed does not lower interest rates, there's going to be a correction. And it's going to be a little bit ringing given how extensive the predictions are right now. You know, when the market really believes something is going to happen and then prices it in, and then it doesn't happen, the correction can be a little bit wrenching. So that you could see that in the news sooner rather than later as a result. Yeah, the market actually had a little freak out a week ago because there was some data released that maybe the economy was slowing down faster than was thought. So there was a big sell-off, and everybody was talking about how, you know, there could be a recession looming, and, you know, blah blah blah, the usual bullshit. And the next day, some new data came out, and then just it was erased. You know, just total reversal. So, you know, expectations are an important part of the economy. You know, economic actors are not just reacting to information as it comes to them, right? They're also trying to predict what's going to happen, and those predictions also influence their behavior.
That's true.
So we'll see what happens as far as what the Fed does. I'm a little skeptical that they're going to lower rates, because I remember back before the pandemic when there was a lot of guys on the Fed who were talking about how they thought rates were too low and that they needed to be higher because they needed room in case something happened to the economy, right? If your interest rates are at like 0%, and then some kind of crash happens, like if the economy enters recession, then you don't really have anywhere to go, right? Normally when the economy does worse, monetary policy lowers interest rates, or more accurately, the central bank does as part of its monetary policy. But if it's already super low, then like you can't do anything. You have no tools to really work with. You know, there's some stuff you can do, but it's really weird and technical, and the impact is going to be pretty well muted. So some of the inflation hawks in the Fed were saying that rates need to be much higher. Just keeping them this low for this long serves no real purpose. And, you know, those guys kind of changed their mind a little bit. They got kind of quiet for a while, but I think they've always been there, and I suspect they're going to be the ones who ultimately convince Jay Powell to not lower rates yet. I think from their perspective, they would rather rates be even higher than they are now. So I think the compromise is going to be basically keeping them where they are until there's more certainty about the direction of the economy. So that's been the big debate in markets. Like, what's the Fed going to do? Are we going to have lower rates, higher rates, you know, what have you?
Gotcha. Do you think they're going to end the Fed?
No. No, I do not. Sorry to disappoint all the libertarians out there, but most likely the Fed's not going anywhere.
Oh, yeah. Well, regardless of inflation, we've been able to happily report 400 frames per second in StarCraft 2.
Congrats.
Very zoom in now.
I assume that's pretty high.
Yeah. I would say, maybe Chad can weigh in, a frame rate that feels good for playing the game is something above 80. If it's like 60 to 80, and then consistently over there during fights, you can micro during the fights and control your units. A lot of times it'll dip pretty low, and you do actually have some gameplay difficulty just because the frame rate is low. But if it's very fast, you have Complete control. I think beyond 200 frames a second, it kind of doesn't matter. Chat saying 120 to 180 is really great. Many people turn down their graphics in StarCraft because the game flow is a lot more important than the graphics for them.
Yeah.
And invisible units are easier to see.
Really?
Yeah.
Sneaky.
The movements of invisible units are more concealed by the higher graphics. Lower graphics, they have a more clear outline.
Interesting. Cool.
Well, cool. Appreciate you, Chad, for weighing in, and Fuzzy Cord for handling long questions, and Agent Smith for another lovely discussion. We will see you on the next episode of World Discussion with Agent Smith.
Yep. Thanks again. Always a privilege. Talk to you next time.
GG.